Greetings and welcome to Legacies of Wavryn, Lore of the Endelment. This will be Chapter 5 of this reading. The man who had carelessly struck the girl was James Jericho, or JJ as we called him. Amazingly enough, JJ was one of the few ancient survivors that lived since the end of his kind, exceeding his lifespan. Being that he no longer had his ancient powers, JJ was no more than an elderly Kexan that kept his youthful looks. He had worked for father after he was defeated by my elder brother Eyeless in the Empire War. However, before my brother could execute him, JJ's life was spared by father. At first, he was just a simple butler, and was never able to go anywhere outside of the palace or into many of the rooms within it. Along with that, he rarely ever spoke to anyone, only about what needed to be done and how it needed to be accomplished. Nothing ever personal or friendly. After a few years, JJ became father's personal bodyguard, where he was like that for many years. JJ was 6 feet, 2 inches tall, and looked as though he had slightly less muscle mass than me. The iris in his eyes were black, making it hard to tell if he was powerful since they couldn't shine. Surprisingly, his pupils were white, yet those didn't shine either. Even with his eye color being black, his aura was hardly visible, could only be seen as infrared heat. His hairstyle was no different from mine, except it was completely faint glowing white and was a foot shorter in length in the back. Everything that JJ wore or held was faintly glowing white. I don't know how he did that. Baggy cargo pants with the leggings tucked in his boots, held up by a simple leather belt. He also wore training gloves that had a small cut in the center of both palms and a leather trench coat, with small tears and cuts at the elbows, shoulders, and at the collar of the coat. He wore the coat over a small t-shirt tucked in his pants, with one big gash going from it just under the right side of his ribs to his lower back. In anger and in complete blind rage, I mindlessly swung my fists at JJ as he swiftly and effortlessly dodged them, while he slowly stepped back towards the front door. Once we got into the center of the restaurant, he blocked my right fist from his face with his sword just by jutting it up with his left hand, as if stabbing the air. My right fist struck the blade dead center and was sliced through to the wrist, leaving just a couple inches between his chin and my knuckles. Though he stopped my swing, I continued to push forward to try and reach for him, forcing the blade to slowly cut down the center of my arm as the tip of my fist started to rejuvenate. JJ took a step back as he just locked eyes with me, showing no emotion of any kind in his expression or in his tone of voice. "What's this?" he asked. "Is the mighty Zaec and Shero, son and prince of Lord Dominic and Shero, getting upset over a simple Quellen? A weak, pathetic, and degrading mortal of a human?" "Shut your goddamn mouth, Jericho," I yelled furiously. "She was an innocent. You had no right to harm her." I then pulled my right fist away, the blade stuck in the middle of my forearm, and swung my left fist at the man's face. JJ quickly stepped back again and kicked my fist with his left foot, as to block it. Then as we stood pushing against each other, he said, "Such hatred, Raekin. I never thought you'd react this way. I was hoping to take her spot so that I could talk with you. But it seems as though you're trying to strike me down for something that you yourself would have done. Not if it wasn't innocent. I would have never touched her." "Tell me then, Raekin." JJ quickly placed his foot down and spun around to kick me with his right heel. As he raised his foot in the air, I quickly pulled his sword out of my right arm with my left hand and blocked his kick just inches away from my face. However, the way I blocked his attack wasn't something normal. I grabbed the hilt and twisted it so the blade would face outward from me and towards JJ's foot, pulling it out of my right arm and stopping his boot with the sharpened edge. Oddly enough, it didn't try to cut him. With his attack blocked, JJ asked, "How do you know if someone is an innocent or not?" I can sense the fear of being caught if someone has stained their hand with an innocent's blood. Fear. Interesting. Not many have that. I can smell the decaying liquid as well. By the way, bad move with the sword. JJ quickly twisted around to kick me with his left heel, which I motioned to try and block his foot with the sword once more. However, the blade disappeared as I swung it up towards his foot. With that, he struck the left side of my head and kicked me through the restaurant, forcing me out into the parking lot. There, I bounced off the hood of some SUV that tried to pull in. The added force tossed me into the center of an intersection within the lot, where I rolled a few feet before I could stand. As I motioned up, I looked over to see JJ jolt out of the hole in the wall of the restaurant and stop right in front of the vehicle, randomly staring at the driver inside. And I knew, if JJ stared at anyone for more than 3 seconds without saying or doing anything, it meant that they had to move out of his way soon. Otherwise, he would kill them where they stood. The driver of the SUV, however, decided to be stupid. They flipped off JJ with their right finger as they honked at him in anger, while yelling to move out of the way. After they honked at him for the 4th time, JJ said, "I'm not about to be ordered around by some mere peasant." He pulled his right arm back as far as he could with a tight fist, then slammed it into the engine of the vehicle. The force of his punch crushed the front of the SUV into the ground and threw its back into the air. As even more stupid as the occupant was, the driver wasn't wearing a seatbelt when this happened. The driver slammed into the roof of the car, then fell and their head broke through the windshield where it had cracked by JJ's punch. By the time I got up onto my feet, JJ had pulled his hand out of the vehicle and stood up straight, turning around to face me. He started walking over as the SUV's backside slowly fell down, placing its rear tires onto the ground with a slight squeal. After taking about 5 steps, JJ stopped and stood about 6 feet away and said, "If you haven't figured it out yet, Rayakin, that hilt you're holding in your hand will only contain a blade if held by the right user." I looked down at the hilt in my left hand, which had small multiple cuts and cracks in it, with a dirty, worn out and faded piece of cloth wrapped around it. As I examined it, JJ continued, "From what I know, it analyzes the user's energy fluctuation and shapes the blade into a resemblance of it. Then the user must transmit energy into the hilt to have it create a blade." I then looked back up at him as he continued, "The blade's unique design and sharpness will be determined by the amount of energy you put into it. But that's only if you dare think you can use it against me." When JJ spoke to me, for what reason I do not know, humans began to gather around and watch us. A few tried to record us with their crappy camera phones or video cameras, which only angered me because none of them were calling 911. Humans. Ignoring the spectators, JJ continued, "We found both swords, but only I can use that one. The other is hidden from everyone, but I doubt anyone can use it regardless. We suspect that either you or Eyeless might know where it is and could use it." Keeping my eyes on JJ, I saw Wolf and Yojin come out of the hole in the wall and walk a little over to us to watch the fight. Yojin quickly glanced over at the broken SUV, then back at us as he said, "Good thing that wasn't my car, man. I would have beaten his ass." Wolf glanced over at Yojin with an angry and annoyed look. Then she turned back over at JJ and me as she shook her head a bit. After finding out why he came, though his theory was wrong, I said, "That's why you're here." "Correct. How did you find me?" JJ stood in silence for a moment, then replied, "That was a little complicated, but it was accomplished about 3 weeks ago. We sensed that your friends, Vincent and Fox, were following you, but they didn't cover their tracks as they looked, finding you in this world. So I followed them and tried sensing for your energy, just to confirm their suspicions. Once I did, I informed my lord immediately, and he said to watch over you till he was ready. Since then, I've done as asked in secrecy." patiently waiting for the moment that we could finally speak. "Why now of all times, Jericho?" He didn't answer. Instead, he just stood there in silence again for a moment, then said, "Go ahead and try to use that sword against me, Zaec. You won't last." I glanced down at the hilt, then threw it at JJ to try and get him off guard. However, he caught it and immediately formed it back to a white katana as I jolted for him. I tried to punch at his face with my right fist, but it was blocked once more by the blade, and I missed him by just a few inches. As I tried again to push through and reach my enemy, JJ said, "You don't seem to learn, do you? You're only hurting yourself." "You forget, Jericho. I can deal with the pain far easier than anyone else." Just then, a loud roar of anger came from the restaurant, quickly followed by a loud sound of metal being ripped and broken apart. My brother, Zaec, bolted out of the hole in the wall with a large stove in his hands held over his head. He threw the stove at JJ as hard as he could while he shouted, "Eat this!" JJ had only enough time to glance over his right shoulder before the stove struck him, pushing him into a building that was behind my right side. The impact shattered the front glass walls completely and crumbled bits of the brick wall around the rest of the building. I looked over at my twin brother, slightly frightened and confused, thinking that I was so grateful that he had a good shot at JJ. Otherwise, if I was hit by that thing, I would have beaten his ass badly. As I grasped the hilt again, the blade disappearing once more, I looked over at where JJ had been slammed into. From what I saw, there was nothing but a pile of rubble where he laid. I turned back to my brother and asked, "Dude, what the hell was that?" "Shut up," my twin barked. "That asshole's gonna get a beat down." Zaec stood furiously with his fists clenched tight, while he shed a few tears and called out, "Brother!" Salis quickly jolted outside and asked, "Yeah, bro? You ready?" "Hell yeah," our little brother replied as he hit his right fist against the palm of his left hand. I turned back to face the rubble that JJ was under, placing the hilt in the right side pocket of my coat. JJ pushed the stove and all the rubble off of him as he stood up, acting as if unaffected by the attack. All the humans looking over at him gasped as few started gossiping in whispers, while they all watched him brush off the dust and small bits of rubble from his body. Afterwards, JJ looked over at us with his cold-hearted stare, while Zaec and Salis walked over to where I was to crack their knuckles and ready themselves. Yojin walked over to us as well and pulled out a pair of brass knuckles, which were weirdly 100% gold with 3 small light blue crystals spiked on each knuckle. Wolf walked over with him, changing into her full animal form as she bared her fangs viciously. JJ glanced around at all the humans, who were even more in shock of what was going on, as he said, "Once I'm done with them, you're next, Quellens." The humans just continued to stare, while some of them began to riot about us fighting and destroying public property. But as they started to yell, sirens from police officials were blaring from all directions and were coming in fast, along with the sound of low-flying helicopters. Took them long enough. As I turned to look behind me to see a patrol car in the distance speed by to near the area, a quick yellow flash of energy went past my eyes. The same flash came around every time I looked over to one of my brothers or friends, making each of them vanish completely from sight. Knowing who it might be, if he was in a hurry to get us out of here, then this fight was out of hand. JJ and I had to settle it some other time. Wolf was the last one to disappear as I looked back over at the Kexan in anger, while one SWAT helicopter flew over with a megaphone telling us to cease our activity. I realized that I had forgotten about Amber and Jewel, so I jolted back into the restaurant, where I found Jewel sitting down on the floor, holding her friend in her arms as she cried. Just as 4 police cars came speeding up to surround the building, I quickly jolted over to Jewel to pick her and Amber up with both my arms and rushed to get them out of there. I couldn't just leave them there, even though they were humans. Their own kind would have done much worse just to understand what had happened at that place. I couldn't let them go through that. Interrogation is like torture, both in their world and in mine. Plus, I promised them, even if Amber was dead. I always keep my word towards my friends. Always. Just as I grabbed Amber and Jewel, I heard a voice call for me, telling me to follow its spirit. Before the authorities could jump out of their vehicles to stop me, I jolted away and vanished from the area. Hopefully they won't figure out which car is mine and impound it. Then again, I followed the energy trail that the spirit left behind, leading me to an old cemetery that looked to have not been used in over 100 years. There, the weather was very foggy and about 70 degrees with a light wind chill. I let go of Jewel and told her to walk around to calm down a bit. Then I looked to my left to see my brothers and friends standing unharmed. I gently placed Amber's body on the leaf-covered ground, then looked over at Yojin, who stood irritated that he couldn't get a punch into my fight against JJ. Wolf stood at my friend's right side, in her half-state, Salus at my friend's left, with Zaec standing a foot away from our little brother. As I stood up and turned to them, I asked, "What now?" Feeling guilty that he couldn't protect Amber, my twin brother walked over to her and knelt down at her right side as he started to cry. Yojin looked over at me and replied, "First, we find out what Dominic is really after. JJ can talk big, but he acts like a punk bitch. Then, if needed, we recruit anyone that's willing to fight against Dominic's empire." He then adjusted his glasses again as he looked over to his left slightly and asked, "Will you join us if it comes down to that, Vincent?" I looked over to my right to see another of my friends leaning his back against an old tree, his eyes closed, with his arms crossed over his chest and his right ankle placed over his left. In his position, Vincent was most likely meditating on something. He usually does that. Nothing important, usually, just likes to do that. Plus, like JJ, Vincent always kept a straight face and hardly ever showed any emotion. Vincent Ducre was exactly 7 feet tall, had lemon-colored eyes that shined brightly, and lemon-colored hair that was spiked up a foot, with 2 small strands that hung down the right side of his forehead to the corner of his right eye. He also had a very thin ponytail that went down to his upper back and was held up slightly by a small black cloth band he tied. He had a pike that hung on his back just by using his energy, tilted from his left down to his right, with a small black metal katana for the blade at the tip. The pike was 5.5 feet long and had a lemon-colored hilt, with black tribal markings that covered a small portion of it. It also had a black spike at the bottom end of the hilt, opposite of the katana blade. He wore a very small red vest, what humans would consider Asian, with a yellow outline and orange flowers as the main pattern. He had large peach-colored pants, nothing like what I wore, tied tightly around his waist and by both his ankles by black straps just over his yellow shoes. He also had 2 small black circular earrings on both of his ears and a black ring on the outer edge of his left eyebrow. Last were his wide black rings on his middle and index fingers, which had tribal markings colored in lemon yellow. In response to Yojin's question, Vincent said, "Of course. But I feel that Dominic's looking for the one thing that no one would have believed could be possible, which is what my family has been seeking." "What's that?" I asked. "It couldn't be that stupid legend that he's been babbling about, is it?" "I believe so. I fear that it does exist, and with its existence, feel as though Dominic will use it to destroy this place when he finds how weak humans are." I looked down at the ground to ponder as I said, "So if that's the case, then we need to find out who or what it is before Father does." "How's that, white boy?" Yojin barked as he looked over at me in anger. "We haven't a clue of where to start looking." "He does," Vincent said, opening his eyes halfway as he looked over at me. "I noticed Ray steal JJ's sword. I bet anything he'd be more than willing to tell us what we want just to get it back." He then closed his eyes again as he said, "If not, then maybe beating the living crap out of him will." Always worked with Kexans. Shit, man, you crazy, Yojin said, slightly shaking his head as he turned away from us. He took his gold knuckles off his hands and watched as he put them back into his coat pocket as he said, "Was hoping on using these, man." He then turned back to me and continued, "If that's the case, Ray, we'll have to find a way to trap JJ." "Trap?" Salis barked as he looked over at my friend. "You can't trap JJ, man. Guy's a beast. He can stop you no matter what. It's impossible to catch that guy." He then made a silly little gesture with his hands as he continued, "It's like trying to kickbox with a kangaroo that's high on steroids." Don't ask. Yojin turned to my little brother and yelled, "Then what do you suppose we do then, white boy? Stand around here and wait for him in hiding like a little bitch? Huh? Is that it?" He stepped closer to my little brother to have them just inches away as he continued, "You want to be a bitch about this?" Salis turned to face my friend and shoved him away, using his left hand against Yojin's right shoulder, while my brother yelled, "Step off! There's nothing we can do against that guy and you know that." "Fuck you, punk!" Yojin yelled as he shoved my little brother back with both hands. "You don't know me." As they continued to argue, I felt as if something was about to go wrong. I had a bad feeling that more were going to die. More innocent people. But I couldn't understand why. After remembering something from my enemies, I thought, why would I feel that more were to lose their lives when it was only a legend? It shouldn't harm anyone. It was only a legend, wasn't it? Punk-ass bitch, Yojin continued as he shoved Salis up against a dead tree. He then yelled, "You need to watch what you're saying to me, white boy." Salis shoved my friend back with both hands and yelled, "You need to watch who you're pushing around, chocolate chip." Yojin quickly grabbed Salis' shirt with his left hand as both raised and pulled back their right fists at each other, while Yojin yelled, "Motherfucker, I'll... Stop it, both of you!" Jewel yelled as she walked up to us. Amazingly enough, the two actually shut their mouths, while the human glanced between them and said, "What the hell's up with you guys? Aren't you supposed to be friends?" My friend let go of my little brother as they stepped away, both lowering their fists as they continued to stare in anger. Then Yojin said, "Shit, poor boy here ain't my friend." Salis adjusted himself from being held up as he said, "Same here with Gangbanger." Yojin raised his right fist again, as if going for a punch, but then slowly lowered it as he mouthed a threat to my little brother. He then turned and started walking away as he said, "I'ma bounce, Ray." He glanced over his left shoulder at me, while quickly raising his hand to wave, and said, "Later, homie." With that, Yojin disappeared into the fog like nothing. Even his footsteps vanished from our ears. "Well, that's just great," Jewel said, irritated. "Now we lost another person." She then quickly turned to my little brother as she pointed her right finger at him and yelled, "What the hell is your guys' problem?" "Don't worry," Vincent said. "He'll be back. Yojin never misses out on a fight, be it intruding or observing." "That may be," I added as I looked over my right shoulder to my twin brother. "But apparently, Zaec is going to mourn a little bit, which leaves him out of the picture till then." I then turned to Salis with a smirk on my face as Jewel lowered her hand and began glancing between us as I asked, "Little bro?" "What?" he asked, looking over at me from staring at Jewel peacefully. "I need you to do something for me." "What?" After a few seconds, without me saying anything and giving him a smirk, Salis realized that I was asking him a favor. He sighed as he glanced over to his right shoulder and said, "Creator, damn it." When he looked back up at me, he whined, "I don't wanna bite me," I barked as I drew a blank expression. "You're doing it, and that's final." "You're shitting me, right?" "Since Father already knows where we are, I want you to go check on Serena to make sure she's okay. Then bring her here so I can protect her if something goes wrong. She'll know what's up if we don't. Nothing gets past her." Upset with having to leave and miss the company of his beloved Jewel, My little brother nodded his head in reply to me and said, "I'm on it, bro." With that, he flew off and disappeared into the sky, gone from Earth. It takes about a week to fly at full speed from Bodor to Earth, so it wouldn't take any more than half a month for him to get back. Unless Serena used her teleportation technique to get back, which might make it a little over a week. "How long till he gets back?" Jewel asked as she watched Salus disappear into the fog above. "Probably 10 days, Wolf replied. "Maybe more." "Yay!" An annoyingly overjoyed, girlish voice yelled from above. A woman jumped out from one of the tall trees nearby and onto Wolf's back, crossing her arms over Wolf's chest and her legs crossed over Wolf's hips. I looked at the woman that had leaped for Wolf just as she said, "I can finally be around my Wolfie without those annoying friends of yours. Except for his lordship Z, of course." "Nice to meet you too, Fox," Wolf said, irritated and in slight agony. Fox was, of course, an Arctic fox Alikins that was a servant to the Ducray family. However, she wasn't much of a servant, seeing as they hardly ever gave her something to do. She also had a very powerful crush on Wolf. I didn't really understand why, but that's just how I knew her. She hardly ever thought of anyone else, male or female. The only clue I got from Wolf as to why Fox loved her so much was that she had saved Fox's life at one point sometime around when I was getting to know Vincent. However, that didn't make any bit of sense. Back then, whenever the four of us were together, we didn't do anything life-threatening. But I guess if that's how Fox felt, then that was her will. She looked almost like Wolf in body structure, but was about an inch shorter than and slightly smaller all around in mass. She also wore the same type of clothing as her, along with her hair and claws being white. Her eyes were dark lime green that didn't shine, with her dog collar being lime green as well, and also had a circular piece of metal connected to it with her name in cursive. Yet what really made Fox unique was her very fluffy white tail, which had an inch-wide brightly shining pink ring around the end of it. The ring acted as a part of her fur, but from what I remembered her telling me before, it signified how well her mood was. Yet every time she was around us, meaning Wolf and I or just Wolf, it would always stay pink, never change. "Ah!" Wolf said joyfully. "This is so cool! I can finally be around my Wolfie again." She then grabbed Wolf's ears with her hands and gently rubbed them with the tips of her fingers, while she said, "Your ears are really soft today, Wolfie." "You say that every time you touch them, Fox," Wolf said, still irritated. "What are you using in the shower?" Before Wolf could reply, Fox leaned forward to put her mouth next to Wolf's right ear and softly suggested, "Or would you rather show me?" Wolf looked over at Vincent with a painful expression and said, "Vincent, please, get her away from me. I'm not in the mood right now." My friend just shrugged his shoulders and said, "Sorry, I can't. She's been having a fit about you all day today. I almost got scratched by her." Fox made a light animal coo. Then Vincent stood up to motion from the tree he was leaning on. He also lowered his arms as he took a few steps closer to me and said, "Ray and I need to talk anyways. She's your problem now." Fox giggled at that, then slipped off Wolf's back and grabbed her right hand as she said, "Let's go walk around. Who knows? We might even find a private spot for us." As Fox pulled my Alikins friend away, Wolf gave a loud annoyed moan as she staggered off with the other Alikins. Jewel watched as the two walked past Zaec, who had not only dug up a grave, but had placed amber in it and covered it up. He also placed a steel yet simple looking tombstone for her, having her name and a small saying written on it. The small inscription said, "There is always a light that will shine through the darkness." Jewel muttered something about the tombstone, then she turned back to Vincent and I as she asked, "So, are all of you able to make things out of thin air?" I glanced over at the human, confused, then to the tombstone. As I turned back towards Jewel, I replied, "No. He probably found some steel materials lying around here and got enough to form it into that. Our powers can do many things that you humans can't do without using any mechanical device. Alteration is just one of those things. Like flying. Didn't we tell you that?" "Wow," she said as she looked back over at the tombstone. "So he literally created that with his bare hands." I turned back towards Vincent as I reached into my coat pocket with my left hand and muttered to myself, "Stupid human." I pulled out the battered hilt that I took and held it out slightly towards my friend as I said, "Here, this is the sword thing I took from JJ in our fight." Vincent opened his eyes halfway and stared down at the hilt as I continued, "I think it might be broken from when I struck it with my fist." "Don't be an idiot, Ray," he said. I chuckled at that, then said, "I'm just joking, dude." Apparently he didn't get it. While focused on the hilt, Vincent calmly yet cautiously reached for it with his right hand. I felt it start to react in an electrical manner towards him as his hand drew closer, making a quiet buzzing sound. Just as Vincent grabbed the hilt, a large amount of force came out in a shockwave and gave him an electric jolt. The shockwave only threw him back to the tree he was leaning on before, while also leaving a small black bolt of lightning that swarmed around his hand for a few seconds. Once he recovered from the shock, Vincent lifted his right hand in front of his face and watched as the lightning bolt flashed 2 more times, then vanished, leaving his hand slightly shaky for a while. My friend placed his hand down as he looked back at the hilt and calmly said, "Huh, interesting." Jewel and I were both surprised at what had happened to my friend, but as I just looked over at Vincent, Jewel looked down at the hilt and said, "Whoa, that was cool." She then looked up at him and said, "Do it again." Ignoring the human, Vincent said, "It seems as though the hilt only allows certain people to wield it, but only JJ knows how to use it properly right now." "Like hell he does," I said, looking down at the hilt. I started to examine it while remembering what JJ had said about it and how I could use it to create a blade. I didn't quite get that, but as I remembered, the thought of seeing Amber being stabbed by the snow-white blade kept rushing through my head. Then, a few seconds after that, I saw something that I wished I had never seen. Something that I was afraid might happen, even if I could settle this whole thing out with Father. That one altered thought was Serena. She was somehow lying in a pool of her own blood with her life stripped from her body. Along with that, a long black katana blade was stabbed through her heart as someone stood over her holding the hilt of the sword. I couldn't see their face clearly. The world turned black around me as I stood staring at the broken hilt I held in my left hand. Nothing but the sounds of metal ripping flesh and bone apart, with screams of pain ran through my ears as if viciously taunting me. Then, the sounds were washed away by a breeze of cold and blackened hatred, where I saw the man who was standing over Serena. He stood with his back turned and his head down slightly. As the man lifted his head up slowly, turning around to face me, he gave a very dark and sinister laugh. Just as I caught a glimpse of the man's face, smiling with pitch-black eyes and brightly shining emerald-colored snake-shaped pupils, Vincent yelled, "My lord, enough daydreaming!" My friend quickly grabbed his pike with his left hand, swinging it so he could grab it with his right as well. He then swung it from left to right, smacking the hilt out of my hand and slamming it into the tree next to Jewel. He quickly twirled his pike around at his right side, then plunged the spike at the bottom of the hilt into my left shoulder and pushed me until he slammed me up against a dead tree that was about 10 yards from where I was standing. Vincent held me up against the tree as he said, "My lord, please forgive me for my belligerent behavior, but you must understand." I struggled to remove his weapon from my body. I had a great panic to go and save Serena myself, but I couldn't move my friend's pike even an inch from me. Yet I continued to try. Jewel ran over to see what was going on, but was quickly halted by Zaec as he kept her at a safe distance. Still holding me against the tree, Vincent continued, "Whatever it was that you were thinking caused a serious reaction in you. Your physical appearance began to change and make you something dark. I have seen this before, but I wasn't sure of what it was until I did some research not long ago before I came here. So believe me when I say this, you cannot fall into that nightmare you were just having." "Fuck you," I yelled, trying to push away the pipe with both of my hands, while also trying to kick it away. "She needs me. I have to save her. I can't lose her." "Calm down. Whatever it was just an illusion. A trick that was played to drop your defenses. Not only to get inside and take control of your mind, but to take control of your body and powers as well." Sensing something was going on, Wolf and Fox ran over to see what was happening and were told by Zaec to stand back so that Vincent could calm me down. Struggling as hard as I could, I yelled, "Let me go, you bastard! Let me go! Please, my lord, stop this." I just ignored Vincent and continued to struggle while he said, "I found that only one being of substantial power can do such a thing to you. Alanu, the black nine-tailed fox demon." I immediately stopped my squirming and stared into Vincent's eyes, frightened at what he had just said. After a few seconds, I stuttered, "Impossible." Or, as you may have heard in fairy tales, the King of Darkness, Shadow. Having heard that, I thought, but that's impossible. Shadow's only a myth. He can't be real. He can't be. I've only heard stories. Stories of how he manipulates the mind and torments the soul into an eternal hell of its own, then uses the hollow body as a slave to do his bidding. No one, in all of the stories about him, has ever lived beyond his grasp. He'll kill anyone that he sees as a threat to him, or that is trying to escape his clutches, no matter who or what it is. He's nothing but a cold-blooded monster. Though this may just be a fairy tale, Vincent continued, Shadow once looked for both Rakar and Enzar and Rokardrak Gaken, the apocalyptic blades, as told by the story. And as in the fairy tale, Rakar and Rokar only let those who were worthy wield them. If enchanted enough, Rakar and Rokar could kill even the most powerful of creatures, no matter what race they were or what powers they had. I believe Shadow knows you have Rakar and Enzar, my lord, and is using your fear and anger to achieve it. Still shocked from the thought that Shadow existed, I asked, "How do you know which blade it is?" I found out that our lives are sort of revolving around these fairy tales that we've been told. In one story, Rakar and Rokar were found at the same time, but were kept separate. That was because the myth was, if they were together, that Rakar and Rokar would end up destroying the universe between two undying rivals. So one of them was hidden, and the other was taken to be used by one of the king's followers as a normal weapon. The one they kept in hiding was Rokar, which in the story was called the Dark Blade of Abyss, whereas Rekar was called the Shining Blade of Bliss. That's why they locked Rokar away, because it was told to be a vile weapon brought upon the universe by Shadow himself. "Great," I irritatingly said, having finally calmed down. "Now, could you put me down, please? My arm is starting to go numb." Vincent stared at me for a few seconds, making sure that I had truly calmed down. Then he jerked his pike out from me. He placed it onto his back again, carefully watching me as he saw me fix my shirt and coat. Using my right hand, I placed an energy field over the area where Vincent struck me, which was able to reform my shirt and coat back to normal as my body healed on its own. Staying cautious with me, Vincent said, "Fair warning, Ray. The stories about Rakar and Enzar and Rokardrak Gaken are true to some extent, while also the stories about the rumored myth are true as well." "You mean that damn Endelment thing, right?" I asked, keeping my focus on my shoulder. "Yes. Yet neither Rakar and Enzar nor Rakar Gaken seem to be fitting to each other's tales, from what I've seen. There might be a possibility that they are intertwined differently somehow. So if you try to use them, please do so with caution. Will do, I said, uncaring as I finished up with fixing my clothes. Zaec let Jewel by, heading back towards Amber's grave to mourn some more. The three girls ran up to me, but said nothing, while Jewel checked where I was stabbed, as pointless as that was. As the human examined me, amazed at how I was able to fix my clothes, I looked over at my friend and asked, "So father's chasing a fairy tale now, huh?" Vincent turned and began walking towards the battered hilt of Rakar as he replied, "In a way, yes. But there's gotta be more to it than that." He grabbed his pike at the bottom of the hilt with his left hand and swung it down backwards, stabbing the katana tip into the hilt as he said, "Even though this is a bad idea, it's the only one we got." He pulled it out and turned back towards me with his pike swung over onto his left shoulder. He stood about 7 feet away, then swung his pike to hold out the battered hilt and said, "You'll have to hold on to Rakar and Enzar until we can either find a way to use it against Dominic or destroy it, because it's not something we want hanging around with Shadow trying to gain it." I grabbed the hilt with my left hand and pulled it off the pike, then placed it in my right inside coat pocket for safekeeping. Jewel stepped back from me, yet continued to stare in amazement where I had fixed my coat. Fox giggled and turned to jump back on Wolf's back, which made her giggle as well. Fox resumed with massaging her beloved's ears, while Wolf moved closer to me and quickly grabbed my right hand with both of her arms and said, "Hey, my lord, you want to have some fun?" I looked over at her with a smirk, even though I was annoyed at what she might suggest, and said, "For one, we're in a cemetery, so be a little more respectful. For two, if Serena were to ever find out about it, she would not only kick your ass, she would kill me, even though I told you not to. So the answer is no." "Aw, come on," Fox whined, looking down at me. "You know she won't mind." "I said no," I barked as I looked up at the Fox Alicans. I jerked my right arm away and looked over at Vincent and said, "The only real thing we can do now is wait for JJ to show his ugly face again. Hopefully I can understand what's going on once I talk with him." Vincent turned to his right slightly as he closed his eyes and said, "Alright then." He then turned away from me while giving a backhand wave goodbye and said, "I'm gone. She's your problem now, Ray." And like that, he too vanished. I watched as my friend disappeared into the fog, then I came to realize what he had just said to me and thought, wait a minute, that means I'm stuck with these three idiots. "By the way, my lord," Fox said, "if we find a nice spot to stay at, I'll let you in between me and my little Wolfie." She giggled as she stopped rubbing Wolf's ears for a second and hugged her, while she continued, "Just as long as I still get my little Wolfie after you're done, I won't mind sharing." Goddamn Mondays. This concludes the reading of Chapter 5. Thank you all for watching and listening. If you like what you've seen and heard, there will be a link to my physical works in the description below. Other than that, stay safe, take care, and we will see you again next week, reading Chapter 6.